Hello, happiness abounder, and welcome back. So, as we kick off a new theme week, I really want to talk about what I call the rubber band effect. And as you know, the last few theme weeks we've discussed relationships. And the rubber band effect, in the terms of self help, is really all about relationships. But it doesn't matter if it's the relationship you have with yourself, the relationship with a friend, family, or even your partner or spouse. The rubber band effect is a real thing. So I want to talk about it this week in terms of what it is, what you can expect from it, and then how to work through it in a good way where you don't drop in the rubber band, but you also don't break the rubber band. So I hope that is of interest to you. And if you're like, what in the world is the rubber band effect? Keep on listening because that's what today's subject is all about. So that said, I think that many of us have probably heard the stories or the metaphor, I guess, of the crabs, right? You have crabs, they're in a bucket, and one will try to get to the top and the other ones will pull it down. That's what we think of the rubber band effect. That's when we talk about self-help when you're like, oh, you need to have you need to surround yourself with people who won't be like those crabs in the bucket and keep on trying to pull you down every time you try to get up. And I don't necessarily think that's a fair analogy. And here's why. Those crabs are acting on instinct, right? And if we're going to put it down to like humans, instinctually, we are afraid of being left behind. We are afraid of being outcasts in society. We're afraid of being different because if we're not socially acceptable, our brains are hardwired to go, we can't survive. So what happens is that there's this fear around seeing somebody else moving up, trying to get out of the bucket, and instinct kicks in. And it's not that that person is necessarily a bad person or evil or they don't care about you and they don't want you to succeed. Sometimes it's just they're subconscious and they can't help it. So when we use the crabs in the bucket analogy for self-help, I think that it really is detrimental to those relationships that you have. Because suddenly you're like, you're pulling me down, you're not letting me get out of the bucket, you are doing this on purpose, I can't believe this, and you have this really negative association to whoever the individual or individuals who are quote unquote pulling you down. Which doesn't really help our happiness because you're like, now you're like, I'm going to succeed and I'm going to be happier or I'm going to achieve this goal in spite of you. And anytime we use in spite of, the word spite, not really going to be the most helpful or beneficial thing for us. So instead of the crabs in the bucket analogy, I like to use the rubber band analogy, which is you are connected via whatever your relationship is to that individual or group of individuals. And you have a rubber band between the two of you. So you are on one side, they on the other side. It's a great big giant rubber band, and it's around your waist and it's around their waist. And you guys are far enough apart that it is taut, but not stretched and not loose and hanging, right? Because you need that tension a little bit, because otherwise if it's loose and hanging, the relationship is like whatever. And if it's super super tight, it's really really stressful and you're like fighting each other all the time because it's way too tight. So you have to have that, like, it's just taut enough that you guys can grow from each other, you have a good relationship, whatever that relationship is. But so let's say that's 5 feet apart. So you're standing 5 feet apart, the rubber band is around your waist, it's taut. You see you're up against a wall, and on that wall is ladders. So 5 feet apart, one ladder going up, 5 feet apart, one ladder going up. So you each have a ladder. When you start your self-help journey, you start to climb that ladder. And let's say the person who's below you, who's attached to you, is not ready to climb. They may have kind of a fear of heights or whatever it may be, whatever the ladder represents here. And so they stay on the ground. Well, what happens is that rubber band that's around your waists, as you go up and they're staying on the ground, starts to get tight. Now, when it starts to get tight, because we are so new in our personal development, our happiness journey, when it starts to get tight, we're like, oh, no, I'm leaving you behind. And that person may be like, hey, you're leaving me behind. And then you're like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make them feel like I'm moving on from them. I don't want them to feel bad. And I don't want to be an outcast in society. And this is a relationship that I'm invested in. I'm just going to climb back down the ladder. So you climb back down the ladder. Then things are fine for a minute. And then your partner goes, oh, I'm really excited to do this, which is their ladder. They start to climb their ladder. And they may get a few rungs higher than where you were. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, you're leaving me behind. I feel like I'm not as ambitious as you or as driven as you, and I just feel like you're moving on from me, and I'm really scared and I'm worried. And they go, oh, well, I don't want you to feel that way. I'll just climb back down a few so it's not quite as tight. And then they climb down all the way. Now, if you have that rubber band effect, what happens is that point where it's like, no, you're leaving me behind, or you start thinking you're leaving them behind and you feel bad about it, is when the rubber band gets tight. But here's the thing. In almost every relationship, because we have the fear of being outcast, not having a place in society, losing the deep and important relationships to us, changing those deep and important relationships to us, we have those fears. And so when it gets tight and uncomfortable, we come back down the ladder. Now, you both have ladders. You both could be climbing at the same time and still maintain that tautness without the discomfort. But it never works that way because somebody's always on the ground first. But what does happen is you go up, then come down because they're uncomfortable. Then they start going up, and then they come down because you're uncomfortable, right? And you just play that game, but you pretty much are staying level the entire time. So what we need to do with the rubber band effect is A, be comfortable with that super tightness, that thing that makes it uncomfortable, that's the trigger for us to come back down. And I think I said A, right? So B, one or two, A or B, is understand that there's two things that can happen. When you're climbing up and the rubber band gets tight, it's eventually going to get so tight that the one of two things happen. One, it breaks. The rubber band breaks. At which point you're free to climb up that ladder like crazy. And there's a lot of emotional and mental work that needs to happen there, if that happens. Or two, which is the one I like best, and which we'll be discussing for the rest of this week, is it becomes so tight that pressure that's going around their waist to go up, and that desire to want to have you in their lives as whatever part of the relationship this is, whatever relationship it is, gets so tight that it starts to pull them up. Slowly it pulls them up, and what happens is it gets to a point that it pulls so tight that they slingshot up past you on their ladder. And then you're like, man, they've really got it going. They're so far ahead of me. Oh, I feel like I'm being left behind, because now it's tight the other way, right? It's tight the way that they're up a little bit higher. And then they have a choice. They can come back down, or they could keep on going and pull you up and slingshot you up past them. And you can slingshot each other up and really embrace this discomfort of the tight rubber band and use it as a tool instead of an excuse to come back down the ladder. So as you are in your self-help journeys, I want you to examine and explore when this has happened to you and whether or not you've come back down or you've pulled and slingshotted them up. And we'll continue to talk about that throughout the rest of this week, but it's just a concept that I love, and I love it so much more than the crabs because it's not about yanking people back down, but it's a conscious choice on your side to not want to leave them behind, even though that's not really what happens. So, leaving you with that today, I hope that you have a wonderful day. I encourage you to look at the rubber band effect in your own lives and tune in for the rest of the week to learn more. And above everything else, remember, you are capable of happiness abound.